The lawyer's office smelled like cold coffee and new carpet, the kind of smell that belongs to rooms where people lose things politely. Della Hartwell sat in a padded chair, while a man named Pruitt read the terms of the settlement in a flat, even voice the way a person reads a grocery list. Glenn wasn't there. He'd sent his attorney instead, a younger man with a good haircut and a folder full of colored tabs. He checked his phone twice before the meeting even started. He couldn't make it himself, the young attorney said, not quite looking at her. He sends his regards. His regards. The attorney slid a pen across the table. 6 inches, 3 initials, and they were done. 16 years of marriage folded down into a stapled packet she could have mailed for the cost of a stamp. The attorney ran a finger down the asset schedule as he spoke, the way you'd point out items on a menu. The house on Halford Street, the savings, the retirement account, the good truck, all of it, staying with Mr. Hartwell under the terms. Then he tapped a single line near the bottom and almost skipped past it. "This last one stays with you," he said. "Real property, Pendry County. A cabin, looks like." He glanced up. "You'll want to deal with the back taxes on that at some point. What's it worth?" The attorney almost smiled. "Honestly, the county has the structure valued at nothing. $310 for the land." He clicked his pen. Mr. Hartwell's position was that it wasn't worth the cost of contesting. That was the kindest thing anyone said to her all day, though it wasn't meant kindly. The cabin was hers, because no one else could think of a reason to want it. Della picked up the cardboard box from beside her chair. Inside were the things Glenn had left on the kitchen island for her to collect. A chipped mixing bowl that had been her mother's. A framed photo of her father in his warden's coat. A wristwatch that no longer kept time. 16 years. And it fit in a box she could carry under one arm. At 41, with $1,114 to her name and a truck with 191,000 miles on it, she drove 5 hours into the Alleghenies to sell it and put the whole sorry business behind her. She meant to be gone by morning. The drive changed its character 3 or 4 times along the way. Interstate gave way to a state highway. State highway gave way to a county road. County road gave way to a forest road that wasn't paved so much as remembered. A single lane of broken blacktop and gravel, climbing into the mountains through tunnels of hemlock and red spruce. The trees carried the last of the autumn edges of rust and gold burning through the dark green. Della cracked the window an inch and let the mountain in. It smelled like wet stone and balsam and wood smoke from somewhere far off. And underneath all of it, that older smell she had no name for. The one that lives in high places where the wind never fully stops. She'd forgotten that smell. Her whole body remembered it before her mind did. She'd spent summers up here as a girl. Her mother would set her on the porch swing in June, and her father would teach her the things he knew. How to read a sky. How to tell a black cherry from a black birch. How to sit in a fire lookout for 9 hours and watch 260 square kilometers of forest for the one wisp of smoke that mattered. "You're not watching for fire," Asa used to tell her, the both of them squinting into the green. "You're watching for the moment the fire's still small enough that somebody can do something about it. Anybody can see a thing once it's burning. The trick is seeing it before." She'd been 8. She'd thought he was talking about trees. Glenn had found all of it charming when they were dating. A woman who could start a fire in the rain. Later, he found it rural. He never told her to stop talking about her father, about the tower, about the mountain. He just stopped asking. And a thing you're never asked about is a thing you slowly put away. Until one day you realize you've packed the best part of yourself into a box in the back of a closet and forgotten which closet. The cabin sat in the low place between the 2 humps of the summit. A squat building of dark-stained logs with a tin roof gone the color of an old nickel and a stone chimney leaning a few degrees off true. Behind it, rising out of the spruce, stood the fire tower, a skeleton of weathered steel with a small glass cab at the top and a stairway zigzagging up into the wind. Della parked in the clearing and sat with the engine ticking as it cooled. The cabin was smaller than she remembered and rougher than she wanted it to be. One window pane was cracked corner to corner and patched with a square of plywood. The porch sagged at the near end where a post had rotted through. Moss had climbed 60 centimeters up the north wall and was working on the rest. The assessor had called it a teardown, and the assessor had not been wrong. And yet the walls stood square. The roof, for all its rust, didn't show daylight, and the air smelled exactly like the last summer she was happy. Which raises the question, why did Asa Hartwell leave his daughter a teardown cabin valued at nothing? What was hidden in it that would make an entire county remember a man even his own daughter never knew? Before we get there, subscribe. The answer is sitting in plain sight. It's been there the whole time. The front door was locked. She tried the keys from the manila folder one by one until the third one caught. A long brass key worn smooth as old bone, and turned with a gritty complaint. The door swung in on a single rusted hinge, and the smell of the inside came out to meet her before she could see anything. Dust and cold, ash and cedar. The particular stale of a room that's been holding its breath since the last person left. She stepped over the threshold and waited for her eyes to find the dim. The cabin was one main room, with a sleeping loft above and a lean-to kitchen off the back. A cast-iron wood stove squatted in the center on a hearth of flat creek stones. A plank table stood against the window with two chairs, one mended at the leg with baling wire. The walls were lined with shelves her father had built, and the shelves held the ordinary archaeology of a life lived alone. A coffee can of nails, a kerosene lamp with a smoke-black chimney, a row of field guides with broken spines, a transistor radio, a coil of rope. On a peg by the door hung Asa's coat, canvas faded to the color of dust, a Forest Service patch on the shoulder gone threadbare at the edge. Della crossed the room and pressed her face into it before she knew she was going to. The canvas was stiff with age, the collar worn soft where his neck had rested. Her hands curled into the sleeves the way they had as a child, and it still smelled like him. Wood smoke and pipe tobacco and the cold clean, nothing of high altitude. She stood there a long time with her face in her dead father's coat, and did not cry because she'd done her crying months ago in a guest room while Glenn slept down the hall with the door shut, and that particular well had run dry. On the table sat his enamel thermos and a tin cup. Beside them, a block of basswood half carved into the shape of a bird that would never be finished. He'd been whittling it the week he died. The breast was smooth, the wings roughed in, the tail still raw wood waiting for a knife that wasn't coming back. Della set it down and looked around the room she'd inherited, and the practical part of her, the part Glenn had spent 16 years promoting, began doing arithmetic. Hire someone to haul the wood stove, burn the rest, or pay to dump it. List the 11 acres with a logger or a hunting club and take whatever they offered for a knob too steep to build on and too far from town to want. Turn $310 of dirt into a few $1,000s and put this mountain behind her like everything else. That was the plan when she walked through the door. It lasted about as long as the daylight did. She didn't drive back down to the motel by the interstate. She told herself it was the road nobody sane drove a forest road like that after dark. And there was truth in it. But the truer thing was that she didn't want to leave the smell of the coat. So she carried in the box and the sleeping bag she'd thrown behind the seat out of old habit, and she built a fire in the wood stove the way Asa had taught her. Kindling teepeed over a twist of birch bark. The draught cracked open just so. She sat on the hearthstones while the iron ticked and warmed and pushed the cold back into the corners. The lamp on the shelf still had kerosene in it. She took it down. The chimney was black with soot, the wick frayed and dry. She trimmed it with her fingers, pinching the charred edge away the way she'd watched her father do 100 times. She struck a match on the stove iron and held it to the wick. The flame caught, small and uncertain, then steadied. She adjusted the wick with the little brass wheel until the light burned clean and even. Then she set it on the table by the window. The small flame doubled itself in the dark glass and threw a soft yellow circle over the whole room. Night on Saddle Knob was a thing she'd forgotten too. No glow on the horizon, no hum of traffic, no neighbor's television leaking through a wall. There was the wind working at the tin roof, the settling pops of the cooling stove, and a darkness outside so complete it pressed against the windows, like water against the hull of a boat. Della made coffee on the stovetop in a dented percolator, because that was what you did when you didn't know what else to do, and she sat at the table in the lamplight in the cabin her father had left her, with $1,114 and a truck and a box to her name, and for the first time in a very long while, no one in the world knew exactly where she was. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like setting down something she'd been carrying so long she'd stopped feeling the weight. She slept in the loft on a bare tick mattress under a wool blanket that smelled of cedar and mouse. She slept hard the way you sleep, at altitude the way you sleep when your body finally believes it's allowed to stop. The lamp burned on the table below, its flames steady in the still air, casting that same soft yellow circle over her father's half-carved bird, over his cup, over his coat. She hadn't known she was repeating his nightly ritual. She hadn't known the lamp had a purpose at all. But 300 feet up the mountain, where the fire tower stood dark against the stars, a single point of light in the cabin window was the only made thing burning in 100 square miles of wilderness. The same light Asa Hartwell had lit every night for 30 years, waiting for someone who needed to see it. She woke before the light had any warmth in it. The first gray was just seeping through the windows, that thin mountain light that doesn't touch anything, doesn't color anything, just makes the dark less dark. And there was a sound in the clearing. Della lay still, listened. Footsteps, deliberate, crossing the frost-stiff grass. Then a clink of metal, a pause. Then the unmistakable sound of someone setting something down on the porch boards and stepping back. She came down the loft ladder as quietly as she could. Her hand found the iron poker beside the stove before her mind had decided to pick it up. She put her eye to the gap where the patched window pane met the frame. A young man stood in the clearing. He stood where the grass met the spruce, watching the cabin, and he went very still when he saw the smoke, rising from a chimney that had been cold for 14 months. He was tall and thin in the way of someone still growing into his frame, maybe 19. A canvas coat too big for him, a knit cap pulled low, a battered pack on his back, and an armload of split firewood he'd just stacked on the porch. He didn't run. He didn't come closer. He just stood there with his breath smoking in the cold, looking at the chimney like it had betrayed him. "I didn't know anybody was up here," he called. Della opened the door. The poker hung forgotten at her side. "Who are you?" "I bring the wood." He nodded at the stack on the porch. "I keep the path to the spring open. I nailed the plywood over that window when a branch came through it in November." He looked at the smoke again. "Nobody told me somebody was coming." "Why are you bringing wood to an empty cabin? Because it's not supposed to fall down." His jaw worked. "Asa told me to keep it from falling down." A pause. "Nobody told me he'd want me to stop." His name was Wade Toiver. It took 3 days and a great deal of silence to get even that much out of him. That first morning, he wouldn't come inside. He stood on the porch with his cap in his hands and answered her questions in single syllables. His eyes moved constantly from the truck to the tree line to the road, the way a creature moves when it's learned that the nearest exit is the most important thing in any room. So she made him coffee instead. He wouldn't take it inside either. She carried 2 cups out to the cold porch, and they sat on the top step looking at the same wall of spruce, not talking, which turned out to be the only way Wade Toiver knew how to be near another person. "You knew my father," she said finally. "He let me stay." The words came quiet. He didn't ask me anything. He just put a bowl of beans in front of me and said the loft was mine as long as I wanted it. Della watched the boy's profile. The careful way he held the warm cup with both hands, like it might be taken from him. "Where'd you come from?" "Around. Flat. No feeling allowed near it. Foster mostly. 11 houses by the time I aged out." He said it the way a man reads off a license plate. They give you a trash bag of your stuff and a list of numbers that don't pick up. Then you're 18, and you're a grown-up, and you go figure it out, and you came up here. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "There was a lamp in the window, in the dark, in the rain, all the way up that road. You could see it from the last switchback. He shrugged a small motion. So I walked toward it. Della filed that away without comment. The way she was learning to do with this boy. Anything more than that would have sent him back into the trees. But it stayed with her. A lamp in the window. A door that opened. She'd lit that same lamp her first night. Set it in the same window, without knowing she was repeating anything at all. And now she sat beside a boy who had walked toward that light, who had found a door that opened, and who had kept the cabin from falling down for a man who never once asked him what happened before. The question hung there, unspoken, between them in the cold morning air. How many others had walked toward that same light? And what had Asa done for them that he never told anyone about? She couldn't bring herself to list the place. That's the truth she arrived at over the next week. Alone, up on that mountain with a boy who appeared at the tree line each morning and vanished into it each dusk. Every time she got as far as pulling out her phone to take a photo for a realtor, she'd notice something. The careful way the shelves were joined. The joints tight and true. The hooks Asa had driven into the porch beam at heights that made no sense until you understood they were for different-sized backpacks. A second mattress, rolled and tied in the loft corner. 3 coffee mugs lined up on the kitchen shelf, 3, when one man living alone needs only one. The cabin kept telling her things she didn't yet have the words for, so she stopped trying to sell it. She started doing the only thing she knew how to do when her life came apart, which was to fix something with her hands. She replaced the rotted porch post with a spruce pole that she and Wade cut and notched together. She cleaned the stovepipe of a season's creosote, lying on her back on the hearthstones with soot raining down onto her face. She reglazed the cracked window with putty she found gone hard in a can under the sink, working it soft in her palms until it took. Her hands cracked and bled at the knuckles. She didn't care. Glenn had spent years making her feel like a woman who consulted men before she did things. Up here, there was no one to consult. There was only the next board, the next nail, and the slow astonishment of discovering that she was, in fact, entirely capable of doing the next thing. Wade worked beside her more each day. Never quite with her, always at a careful angle, the way a dog that's been kicked will sit near the fire but not in reach. He was good with his hands. Better than she was. And he knew the cabin's secrets the way a body knows a house it has slept in. "That board sings," he said, the first time she stepped on a particular plank by the stove, the one by the hearth. Asa never fixed it, said it told him when somebody was up before him. They rechinked the worst gaps in the north wall over 2 cold afternoons, Della mixing the mud, Wade packing it in with a putty knife. And somewhere in the second afternoon, without her asking, the boy started to talk. Not about himself, about Asa. He'd key the tower radio at dawn, Wade said, working the mud into a seam. Read the weather to the whole district in this slow, flat voice, even when nobody was on duty to hear it. I asked him once why he bothered. He said a channel ought to have a human sound in it, in case somebody out there was listening and needed to hear one. What else? Della said. Because she wanted the coins to keep coming. He taught me the Polestar way, how to walk a deer trail without spooking the deer, how to tell from the color of the spruce in August where a fire would run if one ever came. He smoothed the chinking flat with his thumb. He never once asked me what happened to me before. In a whole year, Wade was quiet a moment. You don't know how loud that is until somebody finally doesn't ask. The days took on a shape. She woke in the cold loft before light and came down to build the fire up from the banked coals, blowing on them until they caught. She made coffee and carried a cup out to the porch to watch the saddle come up gray and then gold as the sun cleared the eastern ridge. The spring was 140 steps. Down a path Wade kept clear. A pipe Asa had driven into the hillside decades ago that ran cold, clean water over a stone basin year-round. The first chore of every morning was carrying 2 buckets up that path. By the 4th day, the carrying had stopped being a misery and become a kind of prayer. The burn in her shoulders was the most honest thing she'd felt in years. The work stripped something off her, 16 years of being managed, of softening her own edges so a room would stay comfortable, of saying everything's fine in her girlhood voice. None of it had any use up here. A rotted post didn't care how she felt about it. A length of stovepipe full of creosote didn't need to be handled gently. One evening, she fried potatoes and the last of the eggs in a cast-iron pan on the wood stove. And to her surprise, Wade came in and sat at the table without being asked. He ate. He didn't watch the door the whole time. "Can I ask you something?" Della said. His shoulders tightened, just slightly. "How long were you out there? Before he found you? Before the loft?" Wade was quiet, pushing a potato around the plate. "A while," he said finally. "Couple months. You learn it. Where the church basement leaves the side door open, which gas station won't run you off?" He looked up, and there was something almost like a smile, the first she'd seen on him. "Then there was a lamp up a mountain that didn't run me off. I figured it was a trap, honest. Nobody leaves a door open for nothing. Took me 3 nights to knock." "What changed your mind?" "Got cold enough," Wade said simply. Then, after a moment, quieter. "And he never once made me say thank you. Most people, you take their help. They make you pay it back in being grateful. Asa just acted like I'd done him the favor by coming." He set down his fork. "I didn't know you were allowed to help somebody like that without keeping the receipt." Della didn't answer right away. She got up and refilled his coffee, the way Asa would have. She sat back down, and the two of them finished the meal in a quiet that for once had nothing guarded in it. On the 7th evening, a clear one, with the cold coming down hard and the stars beginning to crowd the sky the way they only do at altitude, Wade did something he never did before. He came up onto the porch while she sat there with her coffee gone cold. "You ever been up the tower?" he said. "Not since I was a girl," Della said. "Asa said most people never climb a thing they own," Wade said. He said the best of the whole day is at the top. He stood there waiting. It was the closest thing to an invitation she'd seen him offer anyone. So she set down the cup and followed him across the frosted clearing to the base of the fire tower. They climbed the zigzag steel stairs in the dark. 90-some steps, the whole structure humming faintly in the wind, until they came out into the little glass cab at the top where her father had spent the better part of 40 years. A stool bolted to the floor, a map table under glass, gone soft with handling. The fire finder he'd used to triangulate a column of smoke to the half-degree, and tacked to the wall above it, faded almost to nothing. A child's drawing of a mountain with a sun over it, and 2 stick figures holding hands, signed in the wobbling capitals of a 6-year-old. Della. She had no memory of drawing it. He had kept it on the wall of his lookout for 35 years. She didn't say anything. She didn't trust her voice. She stood in the glass cab with her dead father's whole working life laid out around her, and below her, the saddle fell away into county after county of black forest, with one single point of yellow light burning in the cabin window where she'd left the lamp, the only made light in 100 square miles of dark. He never lit it for himself, Wade said beside her, looking down at it. The lamp. He lit it every night, whether he was up here or down in town. I asked him once why, when there wasn't anybody coming. "What did he say?" Della asked. Wade was quiet a moment, getting it right. He said you don't light it for the night somebody comes. He said you light it for all the nights they don't, so it'll already be lit on the one night they do. Neither of them spoke after that. They climbed down in the dark without talking. Della banked the fire, and Wade went up to the loft. And for the first time, he didn't roll his pack to use as a pillow against the wall by the ladder where he could watch the door. He used the mattress. It was a small thing. It was the largest thing she'd seen in a year. It was on the 9th day, moving the wood stove 3 inches to true up the hearth, that she found it. She'd levered the stove off its stones with a length of pipe and a fence post, sweating in the cold, and when she swept the bare floor underneath to reset the bricks, the broom caught on a seam. Not a gap. A seam straight and clean, running square along the edge of one floor plank where it met the next. Too true to be an accident of age. Della knelt and ran her fingers along it the way she'd run them along the cabin's other secrets all week. The plank wasn't nailed. It was cut to lift. She worked the blade of her pocketknife into the seam and pried. The board came up with a dry, woody scrape. Beneath it was a cavity in the floor, joists dry and clean, the size of a small toolbox. Cold air rose out of it, and the smell of paper and old metal and something else, something like a held breath. Inside were 3 leather-bound ledgers, fat and soft-cornered, stacked one on the other. A green metal cash box of the kind you'd buy at any hardware store, and a coffee tin, the big 3-pound kind, its lid sealed with a strip of friction tape, far heavier than coffee. Della lifted the top ledger out with both hands. The leather was worn smooth and dark where 10,000 thumbs had opened it. When she turned back the cover, the first page was filled with her father's handwriting, small and square, slanting just slightly uphill. Dated October 9th, 1979. She read the first entry by the gray window light. Then she sat down on the floor because her legs no longer wanted to hold her. October 9th, 1979. A man named Del Rucker came up the road tonight on foot, walked off his shift at the mine and just kept walking. Didn't plan to come this far. Fed him. He talked till 2 in the morning about a thing that happened underground in 71. He never told his wife. Sent him home with a thermos in the morning. Told him the lamp stays lit if he ever needs it again. He won't, but it's there. Della turned the page. The lamp stays lit. The next entry was 3 weeks later. A different name, a different reason. A logger's wife with 2 children, and a bruise she wouldn't explain. Given the loft for a night and gas money for a sister's place in Ohio in the morning. Then a runaway boy of 17, 3 days out from a home in Elkins, fed and warmed and driven by Asa himself to the one sheriff in the county. Asa trusted to handle it gently. Page after page after page. Names, dates, reasons. And at the end of nearly every one, the same line in some form or another. The lamp stays lit. The door's not locked. Told them they could come back. She read them aloud after a while to the empty room, because it felt wrong to let words that quiet go unspoken into the air a second time. Wade came in from the wood and stood in the doorway and listened without taking off his coat. And when she got to one that had no name on it, only initials, and the words, "Thank you for not asking me anything," the boy turned and went back out onto the porch. Della let him. She didn't follow. She understood now what the cabin had been trying to tell her all week. She opened the cash box. Inside was $217 in soft, small bills, a brass key she didn't recognize, and a folded receipt from a hardware store dated 1981 for 2 cots and a kerosene heater that her father had kept for 40 years, for reasons she would never know. Then she peeled the tape off the coffee tin. The tin was full of letters, 61 of them. She counted twice because the number mattered to her in a way she couldn't explain. 61 letters in 61 different hands, some on lined notebook paper, some on the backs of church bulletins and feed store receipts, one written on the inside of a torn cereal box. All of them addressed in one way or another to the man on the mountain. A woman named Carla wrote that she'd driven up Saddle Knob in 1994, meaning not to drive back down, and that the lamp in the window was the only reason she had grandchildren now. A man named Pruitt wrote that Asa's $40 and a tank of gas got his family through the month the plant closed, and that he'd paid it forward 11 times since and meant to keep going. A boy whose careful young handwriting only said, "Thank you for not asking me anything." The same words signed with the same initials as the ledger entry Wade had just walked away from. 61 letters. 30 years. From people Asa Hartwell had never told anyone about. And the last entry in the last ledger was still waiting for her. Subscribe, because the name on that page wasn't a stranger. It was hers. The light was going. Della and Wade sat at the plank table with the ledgers open between them, the lamp burning low on the sill. She found Wade's entry first. She turned the book so he could see it, but she didn't read it aloud. Some things a person should read in his own time. Wade looked at the page a long while. His jaw moved once, a small thing, like he was testing a word he'd never said out loud. "I keep it where I can find it," he said finally. It made no sense, and perfect sense. And Della understood then that the boy had read his own entry before. Alone. More than once. The way you'd return to the one piece of evidence that you were ever worth the trouble. 2 pages on, near the very end of the last ledger, she found her own name, Della. Dated a little over a year before Asa died. She read it once. Then again, because she needed to be sure she was reading it right. Della called tonight. Sounded thin. That husband of hers does all the talking even when he's not in the room. You can hear him in the spaces where she used to put herself. She says everything's fine in the voice she's used since she was a girl, the one she'd use when things weren't. I didn't push, never could push her. She's got her mother's spine, goes quiet and sets like concrete. I wish she'd come up the mountain. I wish she'd sit in the tower with me one more time and watch the green for smoke and remember she was somebody before she was somebody's wife. But she won't. Maybe not ever. The lamp's lit for everybody else's child. I keep it lit for mine, too, just in case. The door's not locked, Dell. It never was. She closed the ledger, pressed it flat against her chest the way you'd hold a child. The well she'd thought had run dry months ago turned out to have only been waiting for the right reason. She cried there on the floor in the lamplight, not for the marriage she'd lost, but for the man who'd kept a door unlocked his whole life and died before his own daughter walked through it. She wasn't going to sell this place. She'd known it for days. Now she knew why. She'd inherited a lamp and a list of everyone it had ever been lit for, and a job. She came down off the mountain 2 days later for supplies, and that was how the county found out Asa Hartwell's girl had come home. The town at the bottom of the forest road was called Cairo. Single main street with a diner, a hardware, a Methodist church, and a gas station that doubled as the post office. Della had bought penny candy there as a child. She walked into the diner for nothing more than a cup of coffee and a sack of flour, and the woman behind the counter, broad and grey and quick, looked at her over the register for a long 3 seconds. "You're Asa's," she said. It carried the length of the room. "You've got his eyes." The diner turned around. And what happened next was something Della had no room for, because in 16 years with Glenn, she had learned to be a woman people were polite to. These people were not polite. They were something older than polite. They came over to the booth, 1 and 2 at a time. A gray-haired man took her hand in both of his. "Pruitt," he said, "your daddy gave me $40 and a tank of gas the month the plant closed in '86. I sent it back as soon as I could and he wouldn't take it. Told me to give it to the next fellow instead." He held her hand a beat longer. "I've given it to the next fellow 11 times now. I keep count." "He never told me," Della said. "He never told anybody," Pruitt said, "and that was the whole of him. That's how you knew it was real." A nurse named Carla sat down across from her. She didn't say much at all, because some debts are too large for the mouth. Della recognized the name from the letter about the lamp in 1994. The woman who drove up, saddle knob, meaning not to drive back down, and found a light in the window instead. Carla just looked at her with the quiet of someone who's already said everything that matters just by showing up. The deputy leaned on the end of the booth with his hat in his hand. Slow, soft-spoken man named Hollis. He looked at Della the way you look at a photograph of someone you never got to thank properly. More than one night over the years, he said, Dispatch would get a call up from Saddle Knob. Your daddy's voice, steady, as you please. "I've got somebody up here, needs a ride, and a friendly face, Hollis. Come slow and come alone." He turned the hat in his hands. When Asa Hartwell asked you to come slow and come alone, you understood a life was getting handed across. I drove that road in every weather you can name. Never once regretted it. It went on like that for the better part of an hour. A whole county quietly returning the 30 years Asa had spent on it. The man who ran the hardware, a wiry old fellow named Setzer, refused her money for the stovepipe and the box of lamp wicks both. "Your daddy carried a tab for me in '79 that I paid back in '91, Setzer said, "and he never once mentioned it in between. So you'll take the wicks, and you'll let an old man feel like he's settling up." Della took the wicks. She was learning that up here, refusing a kindness was its own kind of unkindness. The whole county ran on a quiet economy of debts nobody collected and gifts nobody announced. Her father had been, all along, its quiet banker. By the time she drove back up the forest road with 2 weeks of supplies and a propane heater, she understood. She hadn't inherited 11 acres and a teardown. She'd inherited a lamp and a list of everyone it had ever been lit for, and a job. And that job was about to face its first real test. Because the man in the silver truck was already on his way up the mountain. The silver truck came up the forest road 11 days later. Della heard it before she saw it. That smooth, deep note of an engine that cost more than the cabin and the truck and everything she owned put together, climbing the broken blacktop in a way her old GMC never could. She came out onto the porch, wiping putty off her hands, and watched a clean silver pickup, a big new one with a dealer's plate still in the window, pull into the clearing and stop square in front of the porch, like a man planting a flag. The door opened. A man got out who did not belong on Saddle Knob and knew it and didn't care. 55, maybe. Trim in a quilted vest and good boots that had never once seen mud. The unhurried smile of a man who's already decided how a conversation is going to end. "Royce Vandermeer," he said. "Highland Reserve Development. You must be the daughter." "Della Hartwell," she said. She didn't take the hand. "This is my place. What can I do for you?" He let the hand fall without any sign it bothered him. Turned a slow circle, taking in the whole knob, the saddle between the two summits. The view, falling away, blew to the east, where, on a clear day, you could see 3 counties folding into one another. "I made your father a fair offer on this parcel 4 times over 9 years, Vandermeer said. "Generous, frankly, given what the county has it assessed at. He turned me down 4 times and never once gave me a reason a businessman could understand." He smiled, smaller. "I was sorry to hear he passed. I'm here because I'd hate for his stubbornness to cost you what it cost him." Then he laid it out. The Saddle was the only buildable summit in 40 miles with a view like that and road access a grader could fix in a week. He had 80 acres under contract all around her. A lodge designed 31 rooms, a restaurant, the whole thing. Every rendering of it sat right where they were standing. "Your 11 acres are the keystone," he said. "Without the Saddle, there's no view. Without the view, there's no reserve." He named a number then, $9,000. He watched her face the way a man watches a card table. When that didn't move her, he named another, $40,000. For a tax-rolled teardown and 11 acres of rock, you could start over anywhere, he said. "I'm told you're between things." That was Glenn's phrase. The gentle little knife of it, the way he'd always made her smallness sound like concern. Which meant Glenn had talked to this man, or someone Glenn knew had. Della felt the old reflex rise. The 16-year habit of softening, agreeing, making the man comfortable so the moment would end. And then she felt the lamp behind her in the window. The 61 letters in the tin, her father's handwriting. "The door's not locked, Dell." It never was. The reflex died where it stood. "The parcel's not for sale," Della said. "It wasn't for sale when he was alive, and it's not for sale now. You can keep your renderings." Vandermeer studied her a moment with a new flatness in his eyes, the look of a man recalculating. Then he nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. "That's a shame," he said. The warmth gone out of his voice like heat out of a cold stovepipe. "Because here's the part your father never had to deal with." He set a card on the porch rail, since she wouldn't take it from his hand. Then he got back in the silver truck and backed down off the saddle, gravel popping under tires that had never popped gravel before, and was gone. Della stood on the porch a long time after the sound of him faded. She picked the card up off the rail and looked at it. She didn't have a lawyer. She didn't have $40,000. She didn't have 2 years. And she didn't have anybody. But the lamp was still burning in the window, and she knew, with a certainty that felt like her father's hand on her shoulder, that she wasn't going to let it go out. The smile was gone. Vandermeer studied her a moment with a new flatness in his eyes, the look of a man recalculating, redrawing a map he'd thought was finished. Then he nodded slowly, as if she'd just confer, like heat. Out of a cold stovepipe, nothing left but the metal. Because here's the part your father never had to deal with. He laid it out flat, like a hand of cards he'd been holding back. The cabin was a documented fire hazard. No permits, no inspection. A wood stove, 40 years out of code. His surveyor told him there was a question about the old forest road easement, the one that gave her access at all. He set a card on the porch rail, since she wouldn't take it from his hand. My attorneys can spend 2 years and more money than you'll ever see turning this place into a problem you can't afford to keep, he said. Or you can take $40,000 and a clean walk. He got back in the silver truck. People in your situation usually come around once they do the arithmetic. He said it through the window. Then he backed down off the saddle gravel, popping under tires that had never popped gravel before, the sound of something that didn't belong retreating the way it had come. And then he was gone. Della stood on the porch a long time after the sound of him faded. She didn't move. She didn't look at the card in her hand. She just stood there in the cold, feeling the silence settle back in around her like water closing over a stone. Wade came up beside her, silent as weather. He stood there a long moment, watching the same empty road. "That's the lodge man," he said. "He sent a surveyor up here twice while Asa was alive. Asa ran him off, both times." The boy looked at her sidelong. "You going to be all right?" Della didn't answer right away. She looked at the card in her hand, the name, the number, the promise of a clean walk. "I don't have a lawyer," she said. "I don't have $40,000. I don't have 2 years. And I don't have anybody." She picked the card up off the rail and looked at it. "So," she said, "I guess I've got arithmetic to do." But she didn't throw the card away. She put it in her pocket, and she walked back inside the cabin where the lamp was still burning in the window.